But first, let's have a chat to a bloke called Jamie Simmons. Now, Jamie's joining us from Brisbane, but he is in and around the area that was affected by the Grantham floods those years ago. I heard him on the radio over summer, and I was fascinated by his tale because he has written a book about how his area came back from a natural disaster. So if you're watching us right now in Gippsland, the South Coast, or maybe even in a drought-affected area, pay attention to what he has to say, because there are some really interesting lessons that all of us could learn about how you come back, and most importantly, how you keep people in your town while you are coming back. Jamie's in Brizzy right now. How are you, Jamie?
Hiya, Paul. How you doing?
Mate, great. I heard this conversation. I can't wait to read the book, but let's talk about this here, where one of the biggest things that was dealt with after the Grantham floods wasn't just after you'd found emergency accommodation, after people had sort of got back to some form of normal. It's really important that you keep people in the town, because when you lose a house, when you lose a business, particularly in regional Australia, you might just pack up and go somewhere else. What's your advice to the communities that are facing that tonight?
Well, you know, I mean, like you said, right now when people first face a disaster, a lot of it is about cleanup and getting back on your feet, you know, and it can be a fairly positive time when, you know, you have people helping, you have the support, you have the ADF, and you have leaders starting to step up in your communities. But it becomes a challenge in the months afterwards when people need to feel like, you know, that their community is going to come back. Now, once that support and that help starts to leave, which it inevitably does, people are left with the thought of, well, okay, what next? What next for my community? And that's when you're really, you know, in my experience, there's a bit of a risk. So in the case of Grantham, it was quite a devastating flood, and I was called in by the mayor there, Mayor Steve Jones. Some of your viewers might remember him, a very powerful leader. And he called me up and he said, Jamie, you know, can you help me move this town? I want to move it onto the hill. And this was just a couple days after the flood. So we started very early on thinking about, well, what's this community going to look like? And when you start thinking in those terms, you know, you start asking a lot of important questions and start to try to give people hope for what tomorrow's going to look like, what next month is going to look like, what next year is going to look like. And that's when people really need it, at that point, when the support, you know, the cleanup's done and people are sitting in their living room thinking, do I want to be in this community? Is this still a place I need to be? Or perhaps in a lot of these communities, they're not even in that community. They're in an evac center, or they're living with their parents or friends. So how do you keep them in the community that they were in, and make sure that they stick around for the long term? It's a difficult challenge.
So did you just pick the map up and move it a few k's, or was there negotiation between the people who had a quarter acre here and 3/4 of an acre there? You were able to essentially do a new town plan.
Yeah, so what we did, we started out, it actually started out a bit simpler than that, Paul, because we tried to move so fast. We really started out with, what does the community need? What does the community want? And we had some great leadership again in the mayor and the team around me. And we went to the community, we had workshops, and we said, what do you want to retain about the community of Grantham? What did you like? What didn't you like? You know, and all those things that you kind of forget over time, but you know, why did your parents move here 50 years ago? Or why is your family here? If you're second, third generation resident, why? You know, what was important? And we tried to do that, one, because we wanted to reflect that in the new estate that we built, but also two, to show what is that emotional attachment and really evoke that out, so people could say, you know what, if you can bring that back to us, Jamie, I'll stay. You know, we'll stay. And so early on, that was really the discussion. The technical side of things, you know, that new estate in Grantham, and we don't really call it the new estate, we just sort of call it Grantham, but that's no different than any other residential development. You know, we put a little bit bigger parkland in because we got a few more donations and a bit wider streets, but it's just an engineering project. That was the easy part. The difficult part is working in that community and getting them to believe that there's a future. And then you got to move fast to show them that there's a future, because it doesn't take long for these places to become ghost towns, and we felt that with Grantham.
Well, I saw a video over the weekend where even the business owners of Bateman's Bay are out there pleading for people in Canberra, hey, come back. Yes, there were fires. Yes, they affect some people, but the main drag is still open, and this is a message that we're going to hear a lot from communities in the next little while. But What's your advice to people who are watching us in those communities about how you support each other, how you reach out, and how you tell you get us back to normal as possible, as fast as possible?
Yeah. So I can talk from my experience, and the things that were really important for us is, after those disasters, after that disaster in Grantham, it was a really difficult time, but neighbors started looking after neighbors a bit more than they did before, and people started coming in from everywhere. We almost had too much help. We were turning people away, donations, and friends just reconnected with friends, and people who didn't like each other suddenly started to communicate better and came together. And you've got to harness that in a community, because everyone goes through this disaster, whether you like them or not in your community, and Grantham was no different than any other community. It had its problems, it had its issues, but if you can come together and realize what's important, you're going to get through it. That's the key that we found in Grantham. And the leaders in that community, so for us, we were, Grantham was lucky to have Mayor Steve Jones and the councilors there, and people believed in him, and let me tell you, we got some almighty black eyes, Paul. Like, we were getting yelled at different times, and the emotions were coming out, and it got really tough sometimes. And but your leaders have to stick through that and just say, hey, you know what? I know you're upset and I know you're hurt, but we're going to get through this together. And that's the only way you can get through it. Well, if you start splitting up and fragmenting and falling apart, that's when it gets hard. That's
a good point, Jamie. I'll add a comment after you're gone. But his website there is at jamiesimmons.com. You can get a copy of his book, which is about the rebuilding of Grantham. Thank you so much for the chat, mate. All the best, and say good day to beautiful Brizzy for us.